all the immigrants don't go to the stately homes. They don't go to the countryside. They don't have the fascination of the rural ill the native English people have. So they started a big thing to find out whether it was some sort of hidden racism. And they concluded it was just a lack of interest. Now, it's not your history. So why would you go and spend lots of time and lots of money exploring somebody else's history? It's like us going someplace else, and you see it, it's nice, but it's not you. It's somebody else. And if that's true, then what does that mean for culture-based rural tourism, for example? And what does it mean for support for rural areas? The historical subsidy game was played on a bit. Well, we were from there, so we'll help these people. But as more and more of the population isn't from there, then any investment in rural areas has to be sold as an investment, not as a subsidy. So, I think this, and if you don't solve that demographic challenge, then how do you make your rural policy work? Okay, next. I think the Pacte Rural really confirmed staying the course in policies in place. You've got 2 periods back to back. You've got consistency. People understand that. It's worth them buying it. It's worth them changing the way they think in order to adapt to policies. But this is basically the lesson that we learned from Community Futures. That the reason Community Futures was successful is it guaranteed funding for a defined period with a promise of renewal. Leader is exactly the same. And in fact, there's a lot of similarities between the original version of Community Futures, which had a Community Futures Committee as well as a Business Development Committee, but not the sort of evolution of Community Futures to where it was mostly about business development with no social capacity. So the old Community Futures model is very much like the Quebec one. Okay, next. EI. EI is my favorite things. I do a lot of work in this. And what you really have to think about in terms of EI is that there's 2 kinds of employment insurance. There's the sort of brain-dead income replacement, which gives you money for nothing. And then there's something called active labor market policy. And ironically, Community Futures came out of active labor market policy in the 80s as a way to deal with persistent pockets of rural unemployment. Community Futures was an employment program. And seasonal EIs, and in contrast to Community Futures, is really telling, because seasonal EI creates an incentive not to change, not to get better. It just gives you money to hang out and then go and fish for a few months. So, it's Community Futures has changed people in places. The seasonal EI has just locked things into rigidity. And I think it's important, if you're going to do rural development in Canada, to think seriously about how employment insurance is structured, because it probably, as much as anything else, will condition what happens. And then the last thing, there's still a whole lot of bad economics in rural development. There's just ideas that persist without any strong credibility intellectually or analytically. There's this popular thing now that says because agriculture is not important, the urban economy is the same as the rural economy. Well, duh. How many corporate bankers do you have in rural Canada? How many tertiary hospitals do you find in small places? It is not the same economy. Rural is homogeneous and requires subsidies. Trouble with, I have a friend dead now who said that if you've been to a big city, you've been to, every big city is roughly alike. If you've been to a rural place, you've been to one rural place. Rural places differ markedly. And it's difficult. One of the reasons we've had such trouble with policy is they differ so markedly, you can't, one policy doesn't fit very well. And there's a sense that productivity is lower in rural areas, so we should go over and invest in urban areas, but the whole point of comparative advantage is everybody has to contribute. I might be smarter than Yannick. But Yannick is useful to society. So we still need Yannick. So, right?
And do.
And do. Okay. And there's a belief that I think is sort of disingenuous that the environment and the economy can all move happily along and there's no cost to dealing with eliminating environmental degradation. Well, clearly there's a cost. If you can strip forests out without having to worry about erosion and replanting and wildlife habitat, you get the wood for a whole lot less than if you've got to do all of those things. Environmental stewardship has a cost. It's a cost we should recognize, it's a cost that we should bear, but we can't pretend that we're going to get the same economic rate of return as we did when we didn't worry about that sort of stuff. So, that's all I have to say. Thank you.